doing? It's been quite a while. If you're new here, I'm Vicky. I'm a shoemaker by trade, and I am absolutely obsessed with footwear from the past. This is all reflected in my current work. If you want to check it out, it's on Instagram. And all of these recreation projects that I do here on YouTube are pretty much for the singular purpose of teaching me how to construct shoes from the past and utilize the silhouettes and the proportions, all of those different elements that we don't really see present in shoes today. So the reason for this is basically, like anybody who's obsessed with fashion history, I've been to all the museums, not all the museums. I've been to some museums and, the internet, and just for years have pined over all the different footwear from the past that I want to wear now. So I've decided to just go ahead and make it. And rather than modernize it, truly trying to stick to the original silhouettes. So that is my number one goal, as much as possible. To be completely honest, I don't think I've achieved it very well so far. I mean, in the past, it's getting better throughout time, but it's been one of those things that because lasts aren't made the way they were before, and because the silhouettes are different, it's really hard actually to get a last maker to make the lasts in the proportions that existed before. Unless I have a pair of original antique lasts, which I do have, and I have been able to study. Unless you have those ready to be reproduced, it's really hard. So anyway, I digress. I have decided to go on this whole adventure to, in a sense, learn from the best, aka a bunch of dead dudes. So it's really fascinating once you get into the research, which I have, and I will share whenever that is possible. And can you tell I'm really excited about these shoes? So I came across this image on Instagram back in December.
First, I wanted to know who designed them and when. But here's where it gets a little tricky. The extant shoes I saw were simply dated between 1920 and 1930, nothing specific. Since I've already made a somewhat similar shoe, which was specifically dated to 1925, my guess would at least place these shoes in the later half of the decade. But then I came across two articles which placed these shoes on Norma Shearer in 1930 and 1932. As for the designer, the labels I've come across are Saks Fifth Avenue and Laird Schober. Also, Nazim of Shoe Icons has noted that one of the pairs in his collection features a rosebud button, which is often associated with Andre Perugia. It is well known that Andre Perugia collaborated with Saks, and clearly so did Laird Schober. As for the original designer, we may never know.
Now, the original image I saw was actually a vintage shop selling the shoes. I considered for a moment buying the shoes, but then rather than buying them, I decided to make them and, learn along the way. So that is what I've done. So buckle up, folks, we're traveling to the 1920s. What I did here then, I, as always, worked off of half of the last, so the lateral. It's going to then get mirrored on the other side. And then what I did here is I went ahead and I taped the bottom of the last. This is going to act as my insole pattern and my sock liner pattern and my outsole pattern. It'll give me a good idea of basically all three things. The outsole gets a little bit increased in size, and then these marks here are, as you see, where the upper is going to get placed. So that's something I think it's going to be very beneficial to have marked on my actual insole, because when lasting things like, say, just a vamp, it can be really hard to know where to place it exactly. Essentially two separate parts of a shoe. So that's what's going to happen, and that's why I marked it there. so I think it's safe to say that my eyes are like this at this point. They hurt so much. I have clearly done, redone, erased, redone 100 times, because obviously I drew it on the last, but then when it's flat, I have like the opportunity to clean it up, as we know. And in doing that, I was double checking the pictures and realizing maybe it's not looking quite as it should. I think, let's hope that this looks more like the originals. And yeah, I'm just gonna go ahead now and make the pattern. I worked on this pattern. I've cut it out several times. Not because I made mistakes, but because the first one was the mean form, and I needed to transfer all of these lines into a different piece of paper so I can straighten it out and fix the curves and just clean up the lines in general. So I got this one. And then I had to make like an actual mirrored pattern, which, by the way, I placed too far on the edge, so now I have to like remember to add the actual lasting allowance. You see how this line goes up to here? Well, it should technically, you know, be longer there. I'm not gonna recut it because honestly it's just a lot of work, but I'm going to remember to add the lasting allowance. When it comes to the actual pattern is fine. As you see, like that line is the edge of the actual shoe. So the pattern itself isn't really affected. It's really just the lasting allowance, which again, I will keep in mind. I do think that in terms of practice, the part I need some practice on is going to be the stitching, because that is by far the scariest part. Look at that. Yeah, so we already know that I hold my breath when I stitch. Imagine I'm probably gonna pass out doing this one. When it comes to projects of this nature, aka antique/vintage styles, specifically with tons of cutouts, it is best to work with materials that most closely resemble those used originally. Generally speaking, antique shoes featured impossibly thin leathers, which are quite difficult to find today. I liked the idea of the gold and black version of the shoes, so I opted for this metallic bronze and black kid combination. Then I used a water-based rubber cement to join the pieces together for stitching. Naturally, it took forever to cut and stitch all the little cutouts in this design. Very exhausting work, very meticulous work, but so worth it. To make the insoles, I soak the leather, nail it to the last, and wrap it tightly, allowing it to mold overnight.
Once dry, I trim it, use my insole pattern to achieve that curvy waist, and by using the pattern, I ensure both shoes will match. Apply the steel shank, leather shank cover, and wrap it in the same metallic bronze leather I used for the uppers. Alright folks, here we have an update. Progress has been made. Here we have my insoles covered. Likely the only part that's going to show is really, like this part. I decided to cover the whole part because even when basically for when the shoe is off and on the shelf, in case something peeks out, it'll look nice. It's not entirely necessary though, so whatever. But I did it just in case. These parts have been accomplished. They are stitched, buttons are on. I have both of these. I love that the shape is pretty much there already. Love, love, love that. And then I've got my vamp pieces with the lining as I see it done in the extant, which is fabric followed by some leather at the top. So essentially, when the shoes are off, what you're seeing is leather. So yeah, I have both of these done. My goal for today is to go ahead and put in the heel counters and the toe puffs. So essentially the stiffeners that are going to help keep the shoe shape as we want it. The lasting happens in two parts. After I place the uppers in their predetermined spots, where I marked on the insole pattern. First up is the lining. I'll last it, cement it into place, and make way for the toe puff. I'm used to using leather in the toe puffs for the majority of footwear that I make. It is how I learned, it is what we consider traditional, and it's what bespoke shoemakers use as well. To adhere and help stiffen, I use Hirschkleber paste. The same applies for the heel counter. Shaping the toe puff is imperative in achieving a nice profile. When the toe puff is dry, the uppers lasted and cemented into place. For the heels, I have some inventory of my custom-made Edwardian wooden heels. So in this case, the design doesn't require such a curvy heel, so I sanded it down a little bit. Once wrapped in leather, I cemented them to the shoes to be nailed and screwed once the shoes come off the last. Soles get dyed and cemented on. Give them a final polish and they're done.